Mr. Peabody and Sherman. Now, a lot of you may be wondering why I picked a kids film as my first, film to review in this style. And honestly, I think it's important, and I kind of alluded to this in my trailer corner for this week, but I think it's important to assess what exactly is being put out for our kids. And, I just, I've always enjoyed good, animated films like like the Lego Movie, and last year we had, of course, Frozen and The Croods. I was a big fan of, and I do think it's important to look at this because this is what we're using to kind of instill norms on our youth, and when it's done poorly, like the Smurfs, like what's a recent example, Cars 2, all these just worthless sequels of what used to be great franchises, Ice Age and Madagascar and stuff like that. When you have these films that just lower the bar so much and treat children like they're idiots, you're going to end up with a generation of idiots. And so I'm really glad that in recent years we have had this boost in quality, as I pointed out. Now, of course, there are still ones out there that could do better. Um, I I mentioned a few, but you know just last year we had like again Smurfs 2, Walking with Dinosaurs. I didn't see. I heard it was pretty bad. We had the Nut Job just a couple months ago, so we we have a long way to go. But this they've definitely been taking steps to up the quality of children's animated films, and I think they continued it here. Mr. Peabody and Sherman is a very conventional story. It is. It's the same tired plot lines that you've seen a million times in kids' movies, but it's done very, very well, and it's a very charming it's a very charming film. I'm not familiar with the cartoon series that it was based off of, just because I'm too young. That's beyond my time. Um, but but I was still able to appreciate the characters, and I really fell in love with, especially Mr. Peabody. They really humanized him in a way that was just, it really made you sympathize with what he was going through. Because I'll get into the basic plot. The basic plot is that Mr. Peabody, you know, was an outcast as a puppy, and because of how he was super intelligent. He could actually speak, and he was studious and all of this, and so he was always kind of a loner, and he found Sherman as a baby in an alley, and fought with the court to adopt him. And so now, it's like 8 years later, I believe, and Mr. Peabody has all these inventions that he shares with Sherman. The biggest one being the Wayback, which is a time machine that they use to go back to different, eras of time to and Mr. Peabody basically uses this as an opportunity to educate Sherman, to the point where, when Sherman is uh, to the point where when Sherman goes to his first day of school, he's already so far ahead of the rest of the class in history, and this leads to a jealous scuffle with his eventual love interest, and he ends up biting her. And as a result, Mr. Peabody is told that he basically must prove himself as a parent if he wants to keep Sherman, because this stereotypical grumpy old lady want believes that dogs should not be allowed to raise kids. So it's up to Mr. Peabody and Sherman to prove that that they're meant to be a family. So as I said, I mean, we've seen this plot of the one person, typically father or parental parent or guardian, having to prove themselves in order to keep their child. Someone who did it a lot better was Lilo and Stitch, but I'm biased because that is one of my favorite animated films of all time. However, despite the fact that it is such a conventional story, there's still a lot here, especially in terms of when they do use the way back and go to all these time periods. You get really a lot of you get history lessons, like full history lessons, condensed down into the at least half the time that it would take to teach it in a classroom. I mean, in an hour and a half movie, you get, extensive history knowledge on the French Revolution, ancient Egypt, the Italian Renaissance, and the Trojan War. I mean, in an hour and a half, you get enough you get enough knowledge about all of that to probably take a history test on, at least on a kid's level, on a grade school level. And I really appreciate that. And I know that's carried over from the show, and I really appreciate that they're using this to kind of sneak education into, a children's movie viewing time. One thing I also loved was, because I'm kind of puns are kind of a guilty pleasure of mine, and this film uses a lot of puns, but they're very aware of it. It's not like they're resorting to it because they're lazy writers or anything. It's just kind of, they use it to point out how ridiculous the situation is. I think my favorite one is in the French Revolution. Mr. Peabody says something about how it all could have been avoided if Marie Antoinette would have just given the poor people some bread. But he's like, well, then they wouldn't be allowed to have their cake. And Sherman goes, why? And Mr. Peabody goes, because you can't have your cake and eat it too. And just the timing on that, the tone in his voice, and just the whole delivery of it is just wonderful. And there's so much like that, and it made for an enjoyable experience. And then there's also just the human aspect of it. I really think I'd recommend this movie most to fathers. Like a father and son who want to go, see a movie and bond. This is your movie. It's very much a father-son movie, or just a parent-child movie in general. And so I'd recommend it there. I'd also recommend it for anyone who wants to educate their child, or even if it's like a teacher who wants to take their like first or second grade class, out for a field trip to a movie. Again, this is your movie. You're going to get a lot of, like I said, a lot of history, a lot of education, and a lot of really good values and morals. And, for people like me who have seen this type of outline of a story a million times, it can get a little irritating, knowing that you're seeing the same thing again. But this film has so much more to offer beyond the basic skeleton that you're not going to regret this experience. Or at least I don't think you will. It's definitely, it's one of those now, thankfully, more common kids films that is worth your time no matter what your age. And I'm very happy that I can say that.